All right. Good evening, David. Thank you for joining me.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Cherie Lindbergh. You've seen me on several videos where David and I are talking about brain spotting. We did an overview on the Neuroexperiential Model. And tonight I've invited David back, and he has graciously come to share additional information about the Neuroexperiential Model and how it's expanding and evolving beyond our overview. So we're doing another video on that. And so with that, I will get off screen, David, and let you start sharing about what you would like to share. I'm excited because you said you're going to be sharing things I haven't heard before. I get excited about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's great to be with everybody once again. I do a lot of pondering, and I don't do it on purpose. I just sort of do it, and it happens, and I follow it. And it's something that I think is a good process for all of us in terms of understanding ourselves, understanding our work, but also understanding sort of the concepts that we use, or why we do what we do. Sort of gives me it's like a guiding principle. In the neuroexperiential model, I have talked about that we were taught that you go from history taking to diagnosis to treatment planning. And I just started to naturally build off of that. It's almost like there's a natural sequence that we end up following. The whole purpose of the neuroexperiential model is for us as brain spotting therapists to have a model, an overarching model that fits with us, with what we're seeing and what we're doing. Because the models that we were trained in, originally going back to graduate school, and then was with supervision, consultation, different training programs, and so on, is something that's ingrained in us. That's how we cut our teeth, so to speak. But at the same time, as brain spotting has evolved, and how each of us has evolved as a brain spotting therapist, it doesn't really fit as well, and in some ways it doesn't fit at all. That was the genesis for me of my coming up with the neuroexperiential model, which is, in briefly put, goes from our nervous system, which is not just the Western concept, but the Eastern concepts of the mind, body, energy, indigenous wisdom, which fits naturally into brain spotting and how we approach things. So here's the way I've evolved it up until now. I've added to it, but I've put it in the context of compliance. And compliance is a natural phenomenon. And compliance as something that also is very much of a trauma phenomenon, a survival phenomenon. When we talk about flight, fight, freeze, fawn, some people say, that's sort of in the context of compliance. But I see compliance more neuroexperientially. Compliance is part of how we survive. We meet forces that are greater than ourselves, and we have to be able to flow with them and not necessarily try to fight our way through them. In addition, when we are truly threatened, and the threat can actually be from nature. It doesn't have to be from another person or other people. But when we are threatened, compliance is a very valuable way to survive. Sometimes what seems like the unsurvivable. But at the same time, this sort of creates in us and develops in us a natural tendency to go into compliance mode. And for trauma survivors, and we're all trauma survivors to one degree or another, and some of us have survived a lot greater traumatic challenges than others, but it's part of life. We naturally go into compliance mode. In addition to this, part of socialization is necessary, natural compliance that is developmental, that babies and young children and need to learn that you can't do everything you want to do when you want to do it, and you can't hurt another person. We comply with that. Then when we go to school in the educational process, you can't just do whatever you want, going to pre-K, kindergarten, elementary school, and on. There's certain natural kind of compliance. I think that the educational systems demand a higher level of compliance than I think is necessarily helpful or healthy, especially, developmentally. But be that as it may, we have laws in our countries, and with those laws, we have to comply with these laws, or otherwise we can be in legal jeopardy. So there's a natural aspect to compliance. But when our clients come to us, and I would say, I'll make the sweeping statement, this is coming out of uncertainty to certainty. I would say that clients come with different levels of compliance mode. And I believe it's a lot more than we think. And I believe it's a lot more than we see. I think we need to be more attuned to it, because how we interact with our clients can easily put them into compliance mode, or a greater compliance mode than they might have gone into otherwise. Now, when we are in a state of compliance, when we are complying to ideas, concepts, dictates, and so on, of what we should be doing as therapists and what therapists do, by nature, that we go into compliance mode. And a lot of the education of therapists actually induces compliance mode, with the ideas that this is the right thing to do and this is the wrong thing to do. And if you do the right thing, good things are going to happen. If you do the wrong thing, at least as it's determined, bad things are going to happen. And then, of course, it's your fault. That kicks off the compliance mode. And if you think back to your education as a therapist, or as a counselor, or as a coach, or as another form of healer, on the one hand, we were taught the valuable information that we need to know, and we were taught it in a building kind of process, layer by layer. But at the same time, there was a subliminal message, and sometimes it wasn't so subliminal, that this is the right thing to do, and there's a right thing and there's a wrong thing. We know in uncertainty it's not all that clear, although there's basic human, decency, empathy, presence, boundaries, all of these things that we need to comply with, if we use that word. But here is the concept that I've been evolving, which I call the cycle of compliance, which is our clients come in compliance. Now, if we have been taught not only that you have to take a history, and of course, finding out who the person is and developmentally where they come from and how that's impacted on who they are is quite important for us to know. But how you go about the history taking is another thing. What I'm putting out here are my ideas, and I like to say that my ideas are my bias. So in labeling it as a bias, I want you to understand, I'm not saying these are the facts and this is right, this is wrong, because then I'd be inducing compliance. But I'm giving you my ideas, and I believe them, and I believe them strongly, and I live by them, although they change, they evolve. But in history taking, first of all, if you take a formal history, whether it's in the first session or the first few sessions, some people do it even beyond that. If you take a history and you have an inventory that for your clients to fill out even before you come, or in session, or you read off the questions and take this, you're not going to get all the history. You're not going to get all the salient history. You're not going to get the subcortical history, the somatic history, the pre-verbal history, the generational history, because all of that is carried somatically, it's carried neuroexperientially. So it's important to know that when you take a history, no matter how you take it, okay, you're not going to get all the information up front, no matter how many questions you ask. Okay? And even the process of asking the questions puts the client, well, there's the compliance, they're answering the questions, but there's nothing untoward about that. But the questions that you ask will induce processing in the client. And it's really important for you to know that as you ask all these questions and the client is giving their answers, they're processing. Okay. Just on a humane basis, on an attuned basis, it's important to know that. But at the same time, the nature of what they're experiencing and even how they respond to your questions will be affected by the nature of how they're processing the experience with you. And they're not going to be telling you, most likely, that they're processing. They're just going to be having that internal process. So it's important to know that. At the same time, one of the things that we look for as a client is processing is that the history, the deeper history, the generational, the somatic history, the early developmental history gets revealed in the processing, not necessarily by specific memories or specific information, but by experience. So in this context, it's important to know that history is a much more open sort of process. Okay. But if you take a history the way you were taught to take a history, told to take a history, and that this is the right way, you are going into compliance. Okay, whether you know it or not, whether you like it or not. Again, this is my opinion, it's my belief, it's my bias, and I use myself as the as the arbiter of these experiences, because I've done a lot of reflection on this. The moment we go into compliance, okay, we bring that into the client's field. Okay, and I believe that a client is going to be that when we go into compliance mode, that the field that we bring to the client or bring the client into will be a field that they are more apt to go into compliance mode, which is a natural phenomenon also. Also, we're the authorities. That's why I like to equalize it instead of we're the expert and they're the ones who need our expertise, to not only come even, but to the fact that the client is the expert, because their vast neurobiology is carrying all this information that we only get access to as they tell us or as it emerges. So just in our orientation to how we get, relevant, salient information about the client, historical information, okay, we are apt, in my opinion, to go into compliance. And then from there, as I've built before, the purpose of history taking, as we've been taught for the most part, we have different backgrounds here, is that the history will allow you to form the diagnosis. Okay, and as I've said many times, the diagnosis from the DSM-5 or the ICD-9 or whatever the number is with that now, almost always ends with disorder. Okay, which again it's not a developmental diagnosis. It's not looking at the client's manifestations, their experience of themselves, what we call symptoms that they manifest. It's looking at it as a disorder, as opposed to the natural outcome out of what this client has experienced, going back to generational history and coming through intrauterine experience and birth experience and early developmental times. So the manifestation, what we call symptoms, what we call a disorder, is really a complex mirror of the client's experience. Okay, now, so I'm not saying that there's no value to diagnostic information and diagnostic thinking. I'm just saying that we need to be thoughtful about it. I look at it developmentally. okay, as opposed to pathologically. Um, and if you see the client as disordered or pathological, just holding that space again is going to affect the client. And I'd say, among other things, beyond not feeling attuned or appreciated or empathize with, I think you're going to feel that they have to comply with this because we're their lifeline. After everything they've been through and everything it took them to get to us, we're the client's lifeline. They are dependent on us, just in terms of helping them to understand themselves and to heal. So, from the history taking to the forming of the diagnosis, okay, we are in compliance and we bring that compliance over to our clients. And where does the diagnosis lead to? Well, as I was taught, 40 years ago, and some of you may have been taught 20 years ago or 10 years or 5 years ago, it leads to treatment planning. Okay. Now, having some sense of what may happen, having some organized way of looking at where the process may go is a good thing. It has value. But if you think that you can set a treatment plan before the client has entered into the process, except for the history taken, that is a version of certainty. By the way, certainty goes along with compliance. Uncertainty helps to liberate us from compliance. So the treatment plan is something that then we bring to the client again. And by nature, treatment plan doesn't usually include the client, except for listening for what they're coming for and what they would like. And then it's for us in our great wisdom to come up with this, treatment plan flowing from the diagnosis that's going to set the course of the treatment. Well, in Brainspotting, we have a frame. We don't have a treatment plan. We have a frame. And the frame is brought by the client to us, received by us, and held with us, the client and the therapist, Brainspotting therapist, or the attuned therapist, holds that frame together. And it's the nature of how we hold that frame with the client, their frame, that determines what goes on as a result. And we like to say inside of that frame. So if you compare treatment planning with frame receiving and frame forming, you can see the difference in terms of compliance. But here, many of you have heard me talk about this already, maybe not in the context of compliance. But from here, this is where I've been pondering things that come to me. What is the purpose of the treatment plan? Okay, if you look at it strategically on a step-by-step basis, it's sort of to guide the interventions. Okay, so the history taking leads to the diagnosis leads to the treatment planning leads to the interventions. Keep in mind, interventions are a form of action. It's an action on the part of the therapist, action on our part. Okay. Now, of course, this is an interactive process, and we are to interact with the client who's interacting with us, and hopefully in a sensitive, attuned, egalitarian sort of way. But we are vulnerable when it comes to interventions and the action-oriented nature of it. How so? Limbic countertransference. Limbic countertransference is the client brings in with them their traumatic history, and it is more unconscious, more subliminal, more neocortical, more somatic than it is conscious. And with every client, with every session, we get exposed to traumatic experience, traumatic history. It comes into our office. it radiates, it resonates, and we receive it. Now, sometimes, or a lot of the time, it's the client saying it directly, telling you about something terrible that happened to them or was done to them. That's the direct exposure. But we get exposure with every client all the time. That's why limbic countertransference is ubiquitous. It's inescapable. It's a natural part of the process. Also, our own traumatic history gets activated by the client's traumatic history and by how they present it. So, and sometimes we've been in situations where the client comes in, they tell you about a trauma they've had, and it sounds quite close to a trauma that we've had, and then we know, I got to be on watch with this. This is very close to home. But the nature of limbic countertransference, the limbic system, when threatened, operates on speed and activity. Okay, we talk about flight and fight. Again, it's not fight or flight, it's flight first. That's the first mammalian response to threat. And if that doesn't work, then it's fight. Freeze fits into this in a variety of ways, but I'm not going to get into that right now. Flight is very active, and flight is as fast as it can be. So it speeds up and it's active. Fight there's a frenetic quality to it. Fight, you don't fight slow, you fight fast, fighting for your life. So fight is very active and it's very speeded up. So the nature, and again, I'm giving you my ideas, my bias, you take it in, hopefully it'll get you thinking, hopefully there's some information for you in it, but I don't want you to go into compliance. I want you to go into awareness, autonomous awareness. So the nature, when you combine limbic exposure, limbic countertransference, us being speeded, us being impelled into action, that I believe has to have something to do with how we intervene, when we intervene, and very much so how frequently we intervene. Okay, so again, when you come off of the treatment plan into intervention, by nature, the interventions will have a quality to it that is imbued with limbic countertransference and speed it up and going into action. Just pause and think about it. It kind of makes sense. This is why when people go from doing other modalities to doing brain spotting, the impulse is to jump in. The impulse is not just to wait, but to jump in. And what we teach in brain spotting is, WAIT, why am I talking? We teach sitting back, okay, surrendering to the uncertainty principle, the uncertainty of the client's experience, where it comes from, where it is, and where it's heading. And to, if you're going to intervene less and intervene a little bit later as opposed to more and sooner. That allows you to be in a position where you're not going by speed, from the limbic countertransference, and you're not getting active, flight, fight, intervention, without knowing it. Now, this is mostly unconscious for us. There's nothing wrong about this, nothing bad about it. It's very natural. Okay, but for us to be mindfully developing as neuroexperiential brain spotting therapists, it's important for us to understand this. This is one of the key things in terms of understanding ourselves. Not just what we bring to the process, but what we infuse into the process. And it's natural, So learning about this and learning to have more awareness and learning to more contain this is very much a mindful process. And mindfulness is very foundational to brain spotting. So this is where we complete the cycle of compliance. When we're limbically activated And we are into flight or fight, speed it up, intervention, and we enter the client's field like that. What's the effect of that on the client? Well, it has a lot of effects, but the effect that I'm looking at is that really can easily put the client into compliance mode, or even deeper into compliance mode. Okay, so they come in compliance mode by nature, and we have our inculcation into compliance. That goes to our own compliance mode. And then we have the whole cycle with that. From they come in, we take the history, we give the diagnosis, we set the treatment plan, and then we start to go into the interventions, which by nature speed it up, activated by nature will trigger the client into a deeper sense of compliance. Cherie, I'm going to invite you to come back in now and share your thoughts and ask a couple of questions.
I wish I had some questions. I'm listening and I'm processing as you're talking about it. What was coming up for me. I really was just thinking of sitting with my client and taking action and intervening. Before you even said it, I was saying it out loud. I was on mute. Compliance. So I'm understanding what you're talking about, that the clients, like you said, we're their lifeline, and that if we intervene on some level, their system might be like, what's the right thing to do here so that my therapist is happy with me? So we may not get we might not get the truth from the client because we're putting ourselves in there.
Well, how can we get the truth from the client when this is the field that we set with them?
Yeah. And this brought up, I had a training this past weekend, and there was a moment in the demo that I popped out of attunement, and I said something. The client was having a beautiful moment, and it just like you said, like it's an automatic reaction, like it came out. And the client had a strong enough, or attendee of the training, I should say, had a strong enough personality to say, no, that's not it. And I said, oh, thank you very much for letting me know. But there's so many clients that don't have that capacity.
What percentage of the time when we say something and it's not it, do you think clients actually say to us, no, that's not it?
Yeah, it's not a large percentage for sure. So that's what's coming up.
I'd say less than 10%.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, because the system has learned early and often, it's dangerous to not comply. Okay. And this is the thing. First of all, compliance mode is going to come with every client. Okay, no matter what we do, and that's natural. But how, for all of us who are here, watching this, how often are you thinking about the clients being in compliance mode, or how they might go into compliance mode, or something about that, what we say or do will induce them into compliance mode?
Up until now, I mean, I had thoughts about my clients being able to feel empowered in the sessions, but I didn't think of it in terms of a compliance lens.
Why do you think that is, Cherie? Whatever pops in your head.
Well, because of my indoctrination, my education, we don't talk about compliance.
Right.
Yeah.
We live in a field that demands compliance. Okay, educationally, in terms of legally, practicing in our state or country, whatever it is, insurance companies. Talk about compliance. Basically, if you don't comply with whatever they're telling you to do, okay,
You don't get paid.
Worse than you're not going to get paid. Your client's going to get denied treatment,
right?
Which is worse for all of us than not getting paid. But it's a double dose of that. You think about it in terms of research. What do they call research?
Evidence-based.
Is practice.
Yeah.
You ever think about evidence? Who determines what the evidence is? Okay, is it determined by clinicians? Is it determined by people who sit in front of their clients 20, 30, 40, 50 hours a week, month after month, year after year? Okay, how is that considered evidence? The therapist's experience with their clients?
If we were focused more on an Eastern philosophy, perhaps.
Yeah.
But our Western philosophy, we're very much prove it, culture, which also brings up to me as you were talking, all the systems, the compliance systems within our culture. And so this just highlights the importance of attunement to that client and sitting with them in empathetic, compassionate witnessing, and why that experience for them can be very powerful, because their whole lives have been through systems and adapting through systems to keep themselves safe and comply.
And how absolutely unusual and unique those experiences are for the clients.
Right.
By the way, you said prove it. Okay. What better way is there to kick somebody into compliance mode than to tell them prove it? And what's the implication when you say prove it? It's you have to prove it to me by my standards. And if you don't prove it or you can't prove it, you're worthless. What you're doing is worthless. Okay, should be negated. Shouldn't even be doing it. Just think about how we are surrounded by so many layers and systems that demand compliance from us. Okay, and so how do we our clients come to us? They've survived through myriad ways of complying. So, in our conversation right now, everything I've been talking about in our conversation, how often do we get into this?
Where we talk about compliance?
Yeah, compliance of the client, our compliance demanded of the field and society, and how that intervenes and impinges on the healing process for the client.
We live with it every day.
All day.
And then if you add trauma on top of that, yeah, I'm just trying to wrap my mind around that.
Well, it's not just trauma on top of that, it's trauma underneath that. Okay. Now, I'm going to expand this out a little bit. So many people in our society come from marginalized groups. And fortunately, thank God, people have been speaking out about the experience of being marginalized in terms of dominant culture. Okay. It's a large percentage of our population who are members of marginalized groups and oftentimes members of multiple marginalized groups. If we think of compliance in terms of people who are marginalized in dominant culture, Where does that take this discussion?
Well, it expands it out, just like you said. And my hope for folks that watch this video, that it brings us a new level of awareness, like opens us up, like brings us conscious to the fact that that is the case in our culture.
Okay. For people who, by the nature of the group that they are in or have been forced into, compliance is essential to survival.
Mhm.
Okay. There would be something wrong with them if they don't have a strong compliance mode. But you know what? They don't tell you.
Mhm.
Okay. Again, if you are from a different group, okay, they won't tell you. There's a term, code switching.
Mhm.
Code switching means a person will speak differently to you than they would speak to someone of their own group. Okay. By nature, code switching is a form of compliance. They're speaking to you in your lexicon, not in their lexicon. When we're here to listen to everything they have to say and to follow everything they have to say. So this has, much wider and deeper implications
Mhm.
in the work that we do. Now I'm going to swing this around again. We're out of lecture mode and we're in dialogue.
Mhm.
Why is it? Now, what we're talking about now, what I've been saying, what we're discussing, isn't it both obvious and fundamental?
Yes, but again, it's not something that we bring up and we talk about. And that's why hopefully this will help folks be conscious, bring
But,
it up.
but why don't we talk about it? When we breathe it in and breathe it out every
Yeah,
day, all day.
I think this is just, again, my bias now is, as you were talking, there is a biological need to belong, to connect, to be safe. And so when you are Midwestern saying stirring the pot, if you will, or causing trouble, if you speak to these things, it makes folks uncomfortable and you might be kicked out of the group.
Mm-hmm. And that group might be a particular psychotherapy modality, or it might be the entire field of psychotherapy or counseling or coaching.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We don't we don't talk about it. We don't think about it because it is dangerous for us to. It's not just the elephant in the room, it's the herd of elephants in the room. It's the obvious, but we don't talk about it because we're in compliance mode.
Mm-hmm.
We don't think about it because we're in compliance mode. There's almost a hypnotic aspect to it, You just sort of trance into it and like it doesn't exist, which is another form of dissociation.
And adapting to what is.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Compartmentalizing.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you'll have a client in crisis with a very, traumatic history contact us and ask if Brainspotting is evidence-based. You ever have anything like that happen to you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If you step back and think about it, okay, they're not saying, do you think you can help me? Can you see me? Do you have time for me? Okay, do you want to help me? You're saying, is what you doing evidence-based? that's how it has so infiltrated, our society.
Mhm.
Now, deeper down, the question is this evidence-based? They're really asking, can you help me? But for some people, if you can't come up and say that, we are as evidence-based as modality A, B, or C, some people say, well, I'm sorry, I have to find somebody who does something that's evidence-based.
Mhm. Yeah, the system is all tied and it all goes back to money.
Money and power and control. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. I loved what you used to say years ago, and I hope it starts to take off in terms of, instead of evidence-based, like what is essential for therapy?
Essential therapy. Yeah.
Yeah.
What are the essential elements
Mhm.
that should be there in any therapy that a person is doing,
Mhm.
and it can almost become like a self-review to see, well, if you have most of it or you're missing a lot of it.
Mhm.
Brain spotting, as you teach, as I teach, again, is relational, it's brain-based, it's body-based, and it's mindfulness-based. Okay. And it is uncertainty-based.
Mhm.
Those to me are 5 essential elements of therapy. And if you think about compliance mode, if it's relational, well, a healing relationship really attempts to liberate the compliance aspect,
Mhm.
and have it just go back to pure survival, as opposed to the way that you see the world and approach the world and everybody in the world and everything that happens to you. Brain-based, okay. If you're if you're thinking psychologically and you're not thinking neurologically, you're more apt to be in compliance mode. You're thinking neurologically, it's just what's going on in the system.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
You're less, by nature, going to go into compliance mode. And again, body and brain are really, inseparable, but sometimes it helps to have clarity about that. What are you
Yeah.
feeling in your body? Well, as long as a person is able to identify whatever they're feeling in their body and maybe say it to you, you know, we don't want a person to not say something that they're feeling, or to make up something that they're not feeling, because that's compliance too. But essentially, the body doesn't lie. The body only complies when it has to. Mindfulness space means that you are open to what's going on outside of you, around you, and inside of you, and between us and others, us and, our community. Just being aware, open, and
Mhm.
following where things go.
Mhm.
You know, there, that's not a compliance mode situation. You might say that mindfulness is one of the antidotes for compliance,
Mhm.
which means it's not just for us to promote a mindful experience for the clients, it's for us to be mindful
Mhm.
as we're with the client.
Presence. Mhm.
Presence.
Mhm.
And to whatever degree we go into compliance mode, we become that much less mindful.
Mhm.
Okay. There's really not too much space in compliance mode for mindfulness. And then, that we're working in a field of uncertainty, which really goes with the 4 previous elements of it. And that uncertainty is very much a non-compliance mode. Or I'd like to say better that certainty is more of a compliance mode.
Well, it opens possibility, creativity. Um, I mean, surprises come all the time when you're holding space for the client.
Expansiveness.
Mm-hmm. Mhm. I just think about what you're talking about with compliance, and you'll see even in trainings, phase 1 trainings and phase 2 and so forth. But a lot of the questions, people are searching for the right thing to do, what's not okay, and I just remember, when I first became a trainer, like you were gently always pointing out the lens through which I was seeing the world. And so, I still think about the deprogramming.
Mhm.
And I tend to do that now too, like with attendees, I'm like, there are no shoulds. These are guidelines. They're not protocols. They're not rules. And you can just see the astonishment on, really, like, these, you don't have to. No, you don't have to, but these are some guidelines, explore, experiment. And I just think from living in our world, I mean, we start out doing that as children, but as we grow up, we take all that indoctrination in, and some of us struggle to be able to explore and be creative and use our imagination as adults for those very reasons.
Mhm. I have a question for you. Can you have a genuine threat without there being a resultant compliance?
Say that again.
Can you have a genuine threat to a being, to a system, to a person? Can you have a genuine threat, a real threat, without there being some form of a compliance response?
My first thought that came is, no, I don't think so.
Mhm. Yeah,
They
I
go
don't
to,
think so either, but
they go together.
right.
Hmm.
So it's important to see how there's a lot more threat in our environment that we experience, especially for people in marginalized groups,
Hmm.
where
Yes.
their threat is more concentrated, more, frequent, more historical.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm. And what you had said earlier, it makes a lot of sense that there would be a system for safety. And so code switching makes a lot of sense.
Of course,
Hmm.
of course. Now, I'm going to bring this to a close by making a final statement on this. Okay. For what I've said and what you have said and we've said together, I invite everybody who's been listening to this to reject it in its entirety, if you so choose. Okay. Or to accept parts of it and reject other parts. Should that be your inclination? I encourage everybody who's been listening to trust yourselves much more than you trust me or trust Cherie. Take what you want and leave the rest.
I was just going to say that we're on the same wavelength there. Hmm.
So that experientially, even though I've presented a lot of information and we've dialogued over it, that experientially people will have an opportunity to not have to comply
Hmm.
with these ideas. And to whatever degree it makes sense or you process it, you have to make it your own.
Hmm.
Can't be the way I'm putting it out. Okay. Because if you go according to my ideas, it's a subtle form of compliance. If you take it in and you make it your own and you weave it with your own internal experience, your own internal process, you interweave it with yourself. Okay. That's the only way you can do it without it being compliance. And feel free at any point, anything you've taken in, at any point to just reject it. Whatever you take in, you make no commitment to, so that you can be mindfully in process with all of this. And hopefully my presentation and our discussion will generate a lot of different ideas that you or I haven't presented or haven't even thought
Yeah.
of.
Yeah. I just think of the slide, give yourself time and space and see what comes.
Mhm.
Observe. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing this time this evening and sharing your ideas and thoughts. And I've got some processing to do myself, some thinking to do about where this is going to take me and my thoughts.
And
So,
so do I.
yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much, David. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Thank you for everything, Sheree.